Now, as you may have noticed, one of the men on the slides today is Zanganeh. He is the Vice President of Energy and Mining at Tether. Guy is not only at the forefront of organizing amazing conferences in Lugano, but he's also at the forefront of exploring how Bitcoin mining can coexist and even collaborate with traditional and renewable energy infrastructure. Joining him is Josue Lopez, who is the CEO and managing partner of Volcano Energy and Type 1 Capital. Through Volcano Energy, Josue has pioneered innovative projects that harness the power of renewable energy sources to fuel Bitcoin mining. Are there any Bitcoin miners in the house today? You're into I know you're a Bitcoin miner, great. Some Bitcoin miners in the house? Cool, this one's for you. Any people interested or, hobbyist Bitcoin miners? Maybe mining for heat at home, maybe mining because it's fun. Nice, also mining for fun. Okay, fantastic. This is also for you. And for those that have no interest in Bitcoin mining whatsoever, it's one of the key components of Bitcoin generally. So please do pay attention. And with that out of the way, I can see that the speakers are ready. So please put your hands together and welcome Guy and Josue to the stage.
Hey guys.
Thank you, Joe. Great. So Joe already made the introduction for us, so I think we can skip that. Yeah. Great to be here and talking a bit about the symbiosis that exists between Bitcoin mining and the electricity grid. And we have a short video that we would like to show at the beginning.
Yeah.
You can roll that. Thank you.
Welcome to the land of volcanoes, where renewable energy of Bitcoin lay the foundation of an abundant financial future accessible to all. We are Volcano Energy, a Salvadorian renewable energy company aiming to break paradigms and mine Bitcoin sustainably in Bitcoin country. Our journey begins here with the construction of a 241 megawatt solar and wind energy park. In addition to this park, we've also begun to develop geothermal power plants that harness the natural heat of our volcanoes. Together, these plants will propel El Salvador toward energy independence and a decarbonized, sustainable future. We use Bitcoin mining to adjust demand for energy in real time, allowing us to maintain efficient, reliable, and profitable operations. We are pioneers in sustainable Bitcoin mining, committed to a future where clean energy and technological innovation converge for the benefit of all. We also recognize the importance of decentralization. That's why we aim to drive the global distribution of hash rate, creating a stronger shield against potential 51% attacks. Like flowing lava, the Bitcoin network becomes more resilient and robust. This is the path to a sustainable future where energy from our volcanoes fuels our aspirations. The electrical grid strengthens, Bitcoin mining advances on zero carbon emitting sources of energy, and our communities thrive thanks to this clean and powerful energy. Volcano Energy. We got the power.
Well,
Great.
Thank you, guys. So, Volcano Energy is a project that Giv and I are extremely proud of. We've been working for the past 2 years or a year and a half with the entire team fairly tirelessly, running engineering designs for our power plants, geothermal, solar, wind, running simulations to ensure that our energy doesn't negatively impact the Salvadoran economy, and ensuring that our mining is the best and most efficient and low cost that it can be. So it's a project we're extremely proud to announce that we're breaking ground on most of our energy plants, and we're hopefully going to be energizing most of it next year. So thank you.
Great. So El Salvador is one of our flagship projects, and we're going to talk about that more and actually some other use cases. But we're also going to talk today about, more generally, how Bitcoin mining as a tool can help the electrification of the grid.
Yeah. So we will discuss a couple of Bitcoin mining characteristics, the Bitcoin mining value proposition for electrification, and the electrification landscape in both developing and developed nations. We will give real-life examples of what Giv and I have been through developing many exahashes across the world, both using renewable energy with our experience in transmission, generation, distribution, etc.
So what is very good to keep in mind when it comes to Bitcoin mining, and when we think about it on a high level, how Bitcoin mining can be used as a tool inside the electricity grid, there are three main characteristics of Bitcoin mining that are very important and that are useful for the mental exercise that we're going to do today to understand how this can work. The first of it is Bitcoin mining is geographically flexible. It means a Bitcoin miner can go anywhere in the world, basically, as long as there is an internet connection. It doesn't have to be a very high bandwidth one. It just has to be some internet connectivity. The second item that is very important is that Bitcoin mining, compared to other industries, has a very, very short amortization cycle of 5 years. You can even try to push that down a bit, but 5 years is kind of the cycle where you can nicely amortize your investment, have a good return, and move on. And this is very important because, as we will see later, it can fill certain gaps in the development of the grids. And the third point is that it's a perfectly flexible load. So a Bitcoin mine or a Bitcoin miner can be started basically within seconds and can be shut down basically at no time, in milliseconds. And if you shut down a miner and then you start again, you just pick up where you left off. And this makes it a very flexible load because you do not necessarily need to have continuation of consumption in order to do your main activity, which is Bitcoin mining.
So a few very interesting Bitcoin mining propositions for electrification. What we're looking for is to actually drive that demand that will push us to energize more of our resources and become a type 1 civilization, right? So we have the ability of monetizing stranded and faraway power without the need for long transmission lines that lose a lot of energy through heat and are also very hard to access and take that energy to the consumption centers. The next one, as Giv mentioned, we can balance the grid. We can balance supply and demand, and we can actually make the conclusion that we will make the grids more stable and more reliable, which is particularly important for developing nations.
So now let's look at how an electricity grid typically develops and what kind of factors play a role in that. And for that, we're going to look at a couple of parameters and at a couple of different, let's say, places. So if we first look at developing nations, this can be the African continent, Latin America, Asia, we notice one thing, and that is, you can see on the right, the demographic expansion. So while in Europe and the US and some East Asian countries, the birth rates are flat or negative, you still have a very, very strong demographic growth in many developing countries. And as more people are in a country, they inevitably going to consume more energy. And we can see that also looking at the forecast of energy consumption of different regions. So the first one, so these are like 2025, 2050, and 2063, the 3 bars, and the green ones are Africa, orange ones is India, the red one is China, and then we have EU and US that have like the flat line, like a dead person. So you don't want to have that. You want to have growth always, right? And we see here, like for instance, in the African continent, we're going to see like a doubling and tripling of the energy consumption over the next 20, 30 years. Which makes sense because you have a lot of strong growth in the demographic situation as well. But what that means is that you are going to need a lot of new generation, a lot of new transmission lines, and a lot of new distribution lines to get this to the final consumer. And this is something that is notoriously hard to do and is notoriously hard to plan. It's extremely slow and it's extremely expensive. We have been through this in Europe and the US in the last 5, 6, 7 decades. And we have now here a developed grid, and we're going to talk about the challenges of a developed grid as well. But a developing grid, you can plan basically how you want to do the generation. So there is lots of very large-scale generation plants being built in the African continent, for instance. Transmission lines are being built, and that's how you get to a situation where you have, like you see in the image on the left, very nice, beautiful new substations and generation sites. That's actually in an African country, even nicer than what we have in Europe because they're also newer and newer technology. But when it comes to the final distribution, getting this to the people through the streets, you have a situation where it's still like quite a long way to go. So, and this is one of the places where we're going to see later that is going to create very interesting potential for Bitcoin mining to enter.
Yeah, so maybe a lot of you recognize this photo behind me. This is the Itaipu Dam. I've seen a lot of Paraguay miners here. We all know what an amazing sight it is to see. Itaipu is one of the largest energy generators in the world. It's actually the largest energy generator by production annually. It produces around 84 gigawatt hours of energy per year. So it's an amazing sight to see. However, it has an issue, right? So Itaipu was created as a binational project between Brazil and Paraguay. It's 14 gigawatts in total. Brazil has 7 gigawatts, and Paraguay has 7 gigawatts. However, Paraguay is significantly smaller than Brazil, both in terms of population, in terms of economy, and more important for this example, in terms of energy demand. So really what they have to do is that they have to export 2/3 of their energy all the way to Sao Paulo in Brazil, 1,000 kilometers at a 500 or 600 kilovolt line, losing 6 to 10% of their energy to heat. They sell this energy extremely cheaply, and I'm talking about $10 to $18 a megawatt hour. So I see a lot of Bitcoin miners probably just smiled, and yes, that's really the rate at which they sell it at. And it's because they have no other choice. I mean, or they had no other choice. So they could either grow their population this year by 5 million people, which is unreasonable, or build 100 steel factories that can consume these 2/3 of energy, or charge 18 million iPhones every day, every week, every month, every year. Or they can just mine Bitcoin with it, because it's really just a really cool way that you can just state a very large energy-intensive industry right next to your generation. And the benefits are amazing. I mean, we've seen it in Latin America. We've seen it in a lot of developing economies. A lot of the people there will benefit from high-paying, high-technical jobs. The spread of knowledge will be amazing. The motivation to reach for new technologies is incredible in people in developing nations. They will also benefit from the taxes. When they sell their energy to Brazil, they are only getting whatever Brazil is paying them for that energy, which is essentially nothing. Miners can pay them much more, and they can also tax them, right? So it's pretty much a win-win, and they wouldn't even have to pay that much for transmission. However, many Paraguay miners here know that this is not the case currently. This is not the real-life state of the Itaipu Dam. It's still the way I showed it before. So it comes to a point that if you cannot join them, you have to beat them. You have to create your own energy generation and become decentralized, truly decentralized. Because you're not really decentralized if you're buying the energy from someone else that can just turn a switch and just unplug all of your hash rate from your mining pool. Someone that can just cut a transmission line and then you have no more energy. And this is what we're trying to do at Volcano Energy and other projects. We're trying to make Bitcoin mining truly decentralized from all the geopolitical tensions that happen around the world.
So the Itaipu use case showed very interestingly how a nation can actually have optionality what to do with their energy. And I think that's a great example that Josue mentioned. Is like, you want to have options. Like, you want to have to sell it to somebody else because you can consume it at a very low price, or you want to have the option to monetize in a different way, bringing new technologies to your country, bringing high-skilled jobs to your country, creating the tax revenues within the country. And that's one case. And then there is the other case where it's like, if you are actually actively expanding your generation and transmission and distribution, it is an amazing tool for you. Like, if you're an electricity company, or if you're a government that is in the process of creating lots of generation and transmission because they're foreseeing a growth, or they are having a growth, like in many, for instance, African countries, the issue that you have is, like, you're basically going to build a generation at time t, and you're going to have the transmission substation ready maybe 3 years after the generation is ready. And then you're going to have the more indifferent part, the complicated part, and difficult part, is to have the distribution and especially the final consumption ready. Because while you can plan the generation and high voltage transmissions, it's very difficult for a government to plan actual consumption, because that depends on a lot of different factors that you can't plan for. And therefore, and we see this actively being done in some countries, you can either yourself or invite miners to come and place themselves close to the generation. And remember, at the beginning, we said that Bitcoin mining is geographically flexible and it has short amortization cycles. So you can place them close to your generation, And while you can't sell that energy yet to anybody, you can monetize it by doing Bitcoin mining, and you can use that money to invest in your transmission and your substations, which then distribute the money further to the final consumer. And then you can move that one to the substation, monetize that part to invest in your distribution until the final consumption is ready. So this is an incredibly powerful tool, and we see like one of the countries that is doing that, I think, relatively well is Ethiopia, and it's making a lot of noise. And speaking with their energy company, like they're very happy. Like they're just making like $10, $20 million extra revenue per year that they didn't have. It gives them optionality because the other option is to sell it maybe to the neighbor. And there are always geopolitical tensions. So it's a very interesting tool for them as well.
Yep. So the Ethiopia example is fantastic. It shows how geographically flexible Bitcoin mining is. And here we have another example that comes straight out of El Salvador. This is what a geothermal plant looks like, by the way. This is the Berlin geothermal plant. It was built in 1992. It's 115 megawatts. It's 120 kilometers from its nearest high energy consumption center, which is the city of San Salvador. There's a Lugano Plan B there in January, so I invite you all to come and probably check this out through a helicopter ride or I don't know, an airplane. There are many potential geothermal plants like these in El Salvador. El Salvador has 127 volcanoes, more or less. They can all be tapped for geothermal energy. All of these volcanoes lie in an area half the size of Switzerland, so it's pretty densely packed. Now, in the bottom, you'll see how it normally works. So there's a geothermal plant, and you have a very long transmission line. In this case, it's 120 kilometers or 150 kilometers, depending what substation you take it to. And you're losing about 6 to 8% of your energy in 120 kilometers at 115 kilovolts. This is all dissipated in heat. Now, back in 2021, when El Salvador passed the Bitcoin law, we advised them to find a way of not losing that much money, not losing that much energy. Because geothermal is baseload, and baseload is good for miners. You know, it's 100% capacity pretty much, but demand is not constant. Demand is very variable, and at some cases, you know, this plant had to be shut down about 10% of its capacity. More than that, as I said before, they lose a lot of the energy to heat. So back in 2021, we convinced the government of El Salvador, and with the engineers of the government of El Salvador, we launched the geothermal Berlin Bitcoin mine, which is what you see on top. So it's a mine that's right next to the geothermal plant. It mines Bitcoin with excess energy, with energy that the market cannot purchase. And up until this day, El Salvador has mined 10% of their Bitcoin reserves. So about 570 Bitcoin, which is honestly just amazing. I feel proud of saying that. And they mine it extremely financially feasibly because geothermal has one of the lowest LCOEs, or levelized cost of electricity, of all of the energy generators in the world. Now, we as Volcano Energy, we want to develop a geothermal. We're in the process of developing one. We're using wind and solar to sort of subsidize or reduce the cash burn that is associated with developing a geothermal plant. There's a reason why only governments develop these. It's extremely risky. Financial feasibility is clearly there. It takes a long time, and the only way we were comfortable doing it if we had something else to sort of bankroll us while we were developing this. So in a couple of years, you know, maybe 3 to 4 years, we'll be energizing our geothermal plant in El Salvador and using it to mine Bitcoin. Now, this is all a transmission game. When you want to tap to energy sources that are very far away, you need a stable transmission. And fortunately, El Salvador has a very good transmission line. As you can see, the yellow line, that's pretty much the autobahn for energy. It's a 230 kilovolt line that runs throughout El Salvador. And then all of the red lines, those are 115 kilovolt lines that are pretty much highways, which means that we can tap energy in all of these places, which we are doing with solar, PV, wind, and geothermal, and pretty much inject it to the grid and be able to balance the grid out. So it's really cool. You can find the energy resource wherever they are and just pretty much connect them to the grid and mine Bitcoin with them.
Great. So we saw what Bitcoin mining can do in a developing nation or developing grid. And now let's look at a more developed grid, such as the European grid or the US grid. A very strong trend that we're seeing now also in Europe is that a strong growth in the installed PV and wind capacity. So here, looking at the projection for the next 10, 15 years, like until 2035, the two big green bars on the right side, that's wind and solar, which basically means that a big chunk of our energy in Europe is supposed to, or is going to come from wind and solar. Now, what is the main challenge with wind and solar? The main challenge of wind and solar is like the sun is shining during the day, unless it's cloudy, and the wind is kind of blowing relatively randomly, and we're going to talk about that later as well. And the demand has a certain curve as well. So to match these two is very, very difficult, and it's going to create situations where your production is not matching your consumption. And the thing with electricity is, like, when you produce it, you have to consume it. Storing it is very difficult and very expensive. So you're going to have these imbalances. And especially in the European market, we are already seeing a couple of systematic issues that are showing up in the electricity grid, one of them being technical, one of them being more financial. The technical issues that we're seeing is what is called the grid separation event, which means that you have two places of the grid that are not imbalanced, not in equilibrium, and then basically you separate the two grids to avoid a bigger blackout situation. And we had that the first time a couple of years ago, and the main reason is because you have a lot of intermittent renewables in West Europe, and basically the East Europe and the European electricity grid is very well connected from east to west. They had to like basically open that because otherwise you're going to have a blackout event. And I think there's lots of Italians here. They might remember when Switzerland put in a blackout all of Italy around a decade and a half ago, because there was actually an event in the south of Switzerland. So that's what you want to avoid. It's like the worst thing that can happen to you if you're a grid operator. But the other thing that can happen on the financial side, and this is also a sign of a very inefficient market, is that you're going to have negative prices. So you can see in this chart the negative prices for the years 2022 in gray, 2023 in green, and 2024 in black. 2024, this data is only until June. But these are the days with negative prices. And what does a negative price mean? It means that somebody is paying you to take the electricity. Now, that clearly shows that something in that market is not working. In Europe, it's a big combination of a lot of subsidies being done to create the renewables, and then they're having priority, and then they're having feed-in tariffs, but then you also have a free spot market. So it's creating the situation that you have clear inefficiencies in the electricity markets. And so basically, if we put these two things together, we're looking at the developed grid with lots of PV and wind that have different kind of production profiles, and then you have the consumption that also has some PV on it. You're going to have strong imbalances. And what you can do is, like, again, in the substations, which is basically the node where all the energy comes together and then is distributed, you can place a Bitcoin miner. And remember, we talked about this, the Bitcoin mining being very flexible, and we're going to talk about that again shortly. It can absorb the variations in the production. So it's, again, a perfect way for you to monetize the excess, not having to sell it at negative prices, because that doesn't make sense, and balancing the grid.
Yeah. So here we go into solar. And I know solar is, a lot of people in mining don't like solar because it's intermittent. However, as humanity reaches efforts to become a Type 1 civilization, we must sort of merge with all the potential resources that we have. We have to find a way to live with them, to use them, to work with them. Solar is intermittent, but then again, demand is not constant. It is still flexible. And there are two ways. You either have flexible load or you have batteries, and batteries are hella expensive. They're very expensive. You cannot store energy in batteries, at least not profitably and not now. Eventually, we'll have the technology to make them cheaper. And this is pretty much how it works using intermittent energy. It's a very simplified version of what we do on our first phase in Volcano Energy. This is the way it looks like. On top, you have a very volatile curve. It's very hard to predict when the wind is going to blow, but this is pretty much what a wind energy generation curve looks like. Below it, you have the solar curve, which is pretty easy to predict. I mean, you know when the sun is going to shine, which hours it's going to shine at. And then when you combine them, you see that you have sort of all of these energy generators. Then you add a miner, and you add a miner that is constantly demanding the same amount of energy. So you need to find a way to fill in these blank spots, right? During the day, when you have wind and solar production, you're selling that energy to the grid, and you make a revenue. With that revenue, you can repurchase the energy at a spot market to be able to fill out these white spots. This lets you mine pretty much at LCOE. You have to discount several charges like transmission charges and intraday changes in spot price. But then comes what Giv was mentioning, which is flexible load. You can actually match your demand to your production. So you can overclock or underclock as much as you're producing, matching your energy generator in an intermittent way so that you are pretty much using all the energy in a very efficient way. We simulated this for the last 3 years. It works. It works. It's actually really good both for miners, and it's really good for the, at least in this case, it's really good for the people of El Salvador. They experience a decrease in their energy price, and the grid becomes more stable. There's less blackouts. You are using the transmission lines when the entire industry is not. Now, here's a very, very simplified way, only using solar, of how Volcano Energy is doing this, because there has to be some sort of technical way, a formula that automatically sells and purchases energy from the spot market, and it pretty much looks like this. Now, before anyone tells me after this that we're lying, please take a very close look at the assumptions that are up there. So this model assumes that you're producing peak energy with solar for 6 hours, which is not the case. I mean, you produce 20%, then 40%. At some point at 12 p.m., you'll produce peak production, and then it'll go down. But here we're assuming that it produces 6 hours. There's no transmission charges and no price changes intraday. So let's say that we want to power up a 20 megawatt hour mine, and we want to do so 24/7. So we actually need 480 megawatt hours of energy. On the other hand, on the generation side, you have 100 megawatt peak 100 megawatt peak solar plant. So you'll produce 600 megawatts on the 6 hours that you're producing energy, right? Follow me? Good. So you give 20% to your miner for 6 hours, you'll give them 120 megawatts. You give 480 megawatts to the grid that you're selling to the grid, or just storing it somewhere, net metering we call it. On the mining side, you still need 360 megawatts, but you received that revenue from when you sold the energy to the grid. So you can repurchase that energy from the grid, and you'll still have an excess of 120 megawatt hours. Now, this excess is something that we try to use in a very efficient way. You can subsidize the country's energy. You can pretty much gift it. 120 megawatts is 10% of El Salvador's consumption. You can pretty much gift it to the people and save them some money. You can mine more Bitcoin with it, and you can do a lot of cool things with it. So this is pretty much, once again, in a very simplified way, the formula that Volcano Energy is using. Now, if you add wind, if you add geothermal, the benefits are exponential. Because solar has 18 to 22% capacity factor. Wind is a little bit higher at 33%. At least for our case, and then geothermal is 99 to 100% capacity factor.
Great. So we hope that this presentation was interesting for you, and I think the general message that I would like to transmit is that for us as humanity to progress, we are going to need much more energy. Because you look back 100 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, our energy consumption has constantly gone up, and our standard of living has constantly gone up, and this is going to continue in the future. So we shouldn't think that energy consumption is a bad thing, it's an evil thing, it's actually a good thing. We should try to tap into more energy sources, and we are using actually a very, very small amount of the resources that exist right now in the world. But at the same time, we also need to have the consumption, right?
Yep, exactly. And just for the audience that doesn't know, a Type 1 civilization is that civilization that can harness and use all of the power available in the world. We're currently 0.73% the way to becoming a Type 1 civilization. And many engineers and many scientists, they assume that we'll reach a Type 1 civilization by 2300. That is a long way ahead. So we pretty much, we need to step up. Once again, we need to adopt intermittent energy. We need to be investing in intermittent energy and find solutions to use it. And in my opinion, there's two very easy solutions that we already have. Either use HPC and AI, to help us, build out our country, develop, and we can use Bitcoin mining, which will give us a very robust and very secure monetary system that we all know and we all love, and that's why we're here, right? But then there's another factor. As we reach for the stars, become multiplanetary, and let's say that we're already a Type 1 civilization, we'll need a monetary system that is not based on something that we can find elsewhere. Imagine if our economy is all based in gold, and we find some comet, I don't know, roaming around in the solar system, and we tap it and we mine it, and there's a shitload of gold there. Our economy is worthless. We cannot pay for our rockets anymore. So that's why we need Bitcoin. It's something that is non-inflationary, and we can still protect everywhere in the universe. It's about making a monetary system that not only works here in the world, but it works in a multiplanetary and universal fashion that we can protect everywhere in the universe. This is pretty much what we stand for. But the first step is becoming Type 1. So yeah, thank you guys. You go there?